Senators from Kansas recognized.
Mr. President, thank you. It is appropriate that we're here on this July 4th holiday week, and I joined a number of my colleagues last week that made it clear it was important for us to be here. Raising the debt ceiling is a significant issue that we face, and while I'm pleased to see the discussions ongoing on the Senate floor today, we really do need actions that speak louder than our words. I say that knowing I'm coming here to talk about an issue that we have attempted to bring to the attention of my colleagues in the Senate now for a long time. We have a looming financial crisis. All the Democrat leadership was capable of bringing up on the Senate floor this week was a sense of the Senate that wealthy Americans should pay their fair share of something. And I suppose we'll have a discussion about that has begun and will continue for the next few days. But I believe that Americans deserve leadership in our nation's capital to confront the real fiscal challenges. Not just this desire to kick the can down the road and ignore the crisis that we face. And in my view, our President and the Senate leadership have failed to lead. They failed to adopt the President's own Deficit Reduction Commission report. The President's not proposed the results of that report. Failed to pass a budget in over 2 years. Failed to introduce a budget even in our committee this year. And the President's budget that he did propose this year is woefully inadequate in addressing the fiscal crisis, the deficits that we face. Crafting a budget is one of the basic responsibilities of Congress, but it hasn't happened. No country, business, or family can operate responsibly without a budget. I serve on the Appropriations Committee. I would love to have a budget that set the guidelines for us to begin the process of determining how much money we should spend, what things might be increased, decreased, or eliminated. But without a budget, the appropriation process continues to falter. And in fact, it wouldn't be surprising, but once again, we end up with either an omnibus spending bill or a continuing resolution. The President and Senate Democrats have said they are serious about dealing with our nation's debt crisis, but actions will speak louder than words. The truth is that the President's budget and the policies of this administration have made our problems worse. During the last 2 years, the government has spent more than $7.3 trillion and increased the nation's debt in just 2 years by more than $3.2 trillion. The President is missing, and the Senate is dysfunctional. The struggling economy we are experiencing and the financial collapse around the corner is the most expected economic crisis in our lifetime, yet nothing is being done to stop it. The co-chairs of the President's own Fiscal Commission have said the same thing and have warned that if we fail to take swift and serious action, the U.S. faces, quote, the most predictable economic crisis in its history. They predict such an event could occur in 2 years or less. It's time to move past empty rhetoric and get serious about confronting the debt crisis. Delaying difficult decisions and simply increasing the debt ceiling once again without making any changes the way Washington spends taxpayer dollars should not be an option. We cannot afford business as usual. The President's solution is to raise revenues to balance the budget. But does anyone really believe that increased taxes will be used to pay down the debt, or will it just be used for even more spending? History shows that money raised in Washington, D.C. results in more spending in Washington, D.C. When families struggle to pay the bills, they don't simply ask for a pay raise, they cut their spending. The revenue increases we need are not tax increases, but increased revenues that come from a growing economy. The last time we had a balanced budget was at the end of President Clinton's term. Yes, there was some spending restraint, and Republicans and Democrats couldn't get along well enough to agree to spend a bunch of money. But the real reason the budget was balanced was that people were working and paying their taxes. We need a growing economy once again to balance the budget. Increasing taxes reduces the chances of economic growth and the inability to create more and better jobs. If we increase taxes, we reduce the chance of economic growth and we reduce the chance of more and better paying jobs. In Kansas, for example, the president proposes that we increase taxes on those who own a business plane. An airplane is a pretty important component of our state's economy, and this proposal would have a devastating impact upon the Wichita economy, which has already suffered the loss of thousands of jobs under a declining business in this country. Now is not the time to penalize a U.S. industry that produces the best quality airplanes in the world. The U.S. and North America ship a significant amount of business jets worldwide, more than any other region in the world. But because of the recession, nearly every manufacturer has had to cut jobs, some up to 50% of their workforce. We see this in Kansas day in and day out, and yet the proposal is to make it more expensive to own an aircraft. This doesn't punish the owners of aircraft, it punishes the people who work every day to make an airplane. To turn our economy around and put people back to work, Congress and the Obama administration should be implementing policies that encourage job creation, not diminish the chances. Rein in burdensome government regulations, replace our convoluted tax code with one that is fair and simple and certain, open foreign markets for American manufactured goods and agricultural products, and develop a comprehensive energy policy. And yet none of these things are being done by this Senate. Spending more has failed to stimulate our economy. Instead, we should cut government spending to reduce our deficit, cap spending so it doesn't continue to eat up more and more of our gross domestic product, and balance our budget so we don't get back in this mess once again. First, it's time to cut government spending and change the way that Washington, D.C. spends taxpayer dollars. 40 cents of every dollar out of our federal government spending is borrowed. 100% of our tax revenue is spent on mandatory spending and interest payments on the debt. Everything else, defense, homeland security, energy, education, is borrowed. This year we will collect $2.2 trillion and spend $3.7 trillion, a $1.5 trillion deficit. CBO now projects, the Congressional Budget Office projects, that debt held by the public will exceed 100% of gross domestic product by 2021 under current policies. This is a 10% increase in debt relative to CBO's projections of only a year ago. The debate over government spending is often seen as one that's philosophical or a partisan bickering that always goes on in Washington, D.C. And certainly I've heard all of my adult life the conversations that go on in Washington, D.C. and on the talk shows and in the newspapers that talk about Republicans and Democrats arguing about balancing the budget and how much money we can spend. But the reality is that this time it is different, and our failure to act will have dramatic consequences on the daily lives of Americans. This is about whether or not Americans can find a job, can make their payments on their homes and automobiles, whether their kids have a bright future and can pursue the American dream. This is not a philosophical discussion for Washington, D.C. This has real consequences for every American family. We are not, unfortunately, immune from the laws of economics that face every nation, and the failure to get our financial house in order and borrowing under control will lead to increased inflation, higher interest rates, fewer jobs, and a lower standard of living for every American. Our creditors may one day decide we are no longer creditworthy, and we will suffer the same consequences that other countries are now suffering who followed that path. We should learn from them. Secondly, it's time to cap discretionary spending this year and next. We must demand enforceable statutory caps to return federal spending to 18% of gross domestic product, where it's been for almost all of the past 60 years. Current federal spending is now nearly 25% of gross domestic product and remains on track to be high over the course of the next 10 years. Third, we must pass a balanced budget. This amendment to the United States Constitution is the best way to discipline government officials. This amendment would require the President to submit to Congress to pass a balanced budget each and every year, cap federal spending at no more than that 18% of gross domestic product, and require 2/3 vote of the House and Senate to raise taxes. Nothing here is unreasonable. Cut spending, cap the percentage of spending to GDP, and pass a balanced budget amendment. When did it become radical or even irresponsible to live within our means? We know what is going to happen if we don't act, and it would be immoral for us to look the other way or kick the can down the road because politics of these issues are too difficult to deal with. Officials in the Obama administration warned that the failure of Congress to raise the legal debt limit would risk default. But the bigger economic threat that confronts our country are the consequences of allowing our country's pattern of spending and borrowing to continue without a serious plan to reduce that debt. Our out-of-control debt is slowing our economic growth and threatening the prosperity of future generations who will have to pay for our irresponsibility. Our government is not on the verge of financial meltdown because Republicans won't vote to raise the debt ceiling. We are at the point of financial collapse because Republicans and Democrats have spent money we don't have for way too long. We must use the leverage that raising the debt ceiling it now presents to force elected officials to do something they otherwise would not do: curb spending, grow the economy, and balance the budget. If we fail to respond, if we fail to act as we should, if we let one more time this issue pass for somebody else to solve because it's so difficult, we will reduce the opportunities that the next generation of Americans have to pursue the American dream. Mr. President, I note the lack of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.